And I'm glad you're all here. This is Coffee with Katie, which is a monthly free networking and educational event that I do for cooperators. It's a way for me to practice Principle 6, which is giving back, co-ops helping co-ops, and it's a way for me to share some of the knowledge I've learned with all of you, and for you to share knowledge with each other and get to know each other. So I'm glad you're here today. Oh, and another thing, we won't have a session in December. We'll skip December because of the holidays, but we'll be back on track in January. And in January, we're switching to an afternoon session. So we'll go from 12 o'clock Central Time to 5 o'clock Central Time. I had sent out a survey and gotten feedback from many of you, actually. I see lots of names that came through on the survey. So I appreciate your feedback for an afternoon time. And I had wanted to do this to change up availability. So it's hard for some of us to get to a daytime meeting. And so an afternoon or early evening meeting is an opportunity for others to participate that might not be able to at noon. So that will start in January. We don't have a topic for January yet, but February's topic is really going to be great. One of the items, topics that I listed in the survey in terms of interest was spokesperson training, how to talk about your co-op, and that will be the topic for February. And a fellow cooperator from Rooted Carrot will be conducting that session. She does public relations and basically does spokesperson training for a living. So she's done a great job getting her co-op trained and offered to share her knowledge with us in February. So that'll be on the horizon for February. So Thursday, February, I gotta look at the calendar because it's not ingrained in my mind yet, our schedule. Let's see here. I think it's February 20th, February 20th at 5 p.m. is that one. But today we're talking about capital stacks and basically talking about where funds come from and what that looks like for startup grocery co-ops. I have a few slides I'm going to share with you. These are slides that I utilized at the Up and Coming conference. So if any of you attended my session at Up and Coming, you might recognize some of these stats or some of these slides. But I'll share my screen, and as always, you know, this is an informal gathering, so feel free to chime in, ask your questions, put them in the chat if you'd like to, whatever you're comfortable with. Okay, there we go. Does everyone see my screen?
Yep.
Great. Okay, so basically, capital stack is the term that we use to describe the mix of sources of money that your co-op's going to need to open. And traditionally, what we're seeing that capital stack include, is owner equity, owner investments, donations, grants, and debt. Those are the buckets of money. So if you're looking at a pie chart, which we will here shortly, you'd see a piece of the pie allocated to each of these buckets. So I'm going to talk in a little bit of detail about what each of these buckets are. Hopefully some of them are quite self-explanatory, but some of them might not be. So the first one is owner equity. That one is our ownership shares. So that is your co-op selling shares in the store to community members. So that's the equity piece of the puzzle. It's typically a smaller piece of the puzzle because our ownership shares are $200 or some cases like $400 on the high ends. These aren't significant investments. And if you think about your number of owners times your owner equity, that's certainly not enough money to open a grocery store or to run a grocery store. So that's a pretty small piece of the puzzle in the 10% range. Owner investments are another piece of that puzzle. And we typically see owner investments taking the shape of loans and preferred shares. Owner investments are an opportunity for folks who have already become owners of the co-op, so they've already given us that equity, to invest in the store at a higher level. These are legal documents. This is a legal contract that we have with our owners, between the co-op and the owners, and it allows us to borrow money in the case of loans. It allows us to borrow money from our co-op owners at a better interest rate than the bank would lend us money. It's a benefit to the member because they get to park their money in a cause that is aligned with their values, that potentially earns interest, that has significant community impact. It's a plus for the co-op because it's cheaper than borrowing money from the bank, and it's more flexible. We have some leeway with our owners. They're more forgiving. They're more in tune with what we're doing, and so they often will be flexible with those loan terms. In addition, some members will lend money to the co-op with 0 interest. There's a couple of us on the call here who have gone through capital campaigns. Rusty, I'm looking at you. Susan, I'm looking at you. You guys know how this works, and you have experience with that and have seen, I know for sure, owners investing money at a 0% rate, and in some cases forgiving loans to the co-op, which is pretty remarkable. And one of the most, I think, inspiring pieces of the owner investment puzzle is that owners are so dedicated to the co-op that they take that additional step to not only lend money to the co-op, but to do so at 0% interest or to forgive the loan. And then we have preferred shares. That's the second piece of an owner investment. There's a couple of us on the call from Illinois, and Illinois recently, like within the last probably 5 years or so, changed the law to allow for preferred shares, for cooperatives to sell preferred shares to their owners. Illinois has some sticky rules about it in terms of the limits of shares, but it's an option that's available more widely to startup grocery co-ops than it has been in the past. Up until recently, and I'd say probably again 3 to 5 years, we saw startup grocery co-ops relying primarily on loans and donations. We haven't got to donations yet in terms of owner investment. We didn't see startups utilizing preferred shares. Now we're seeing a trend towards more use of preferred shares. And we've got Susan on the call here. She's with Green Top Grocery. At the time Green Top Grocery did their capital campaign, preferred shares weren't an option legally in Illinois, and they weren't something most startups were doing. But we also have Rusty on the call here today, and he's with Food Shed Co-op in Northern Illinois, and the option was available at the time they did their capital campaign to, offer preferred shares, and Food Shed Co-op had success in doing so. So we're seeing that trend change. But preferred shares are basically a different way to invest in the co-op. It shows up differently on our balance sheet. Preferred shares show up as equity rather than debt. A loan to our owners shows up as debt, depending on the bank that you're working with, but most banks see it as debt. Preferred shares are always seen as equity. So in terms of financing, it's a little bit better position for the co-op, and dividends are usually paid at the discretion of the board. So preferred shares operate very similarly to how you would think about stock. It's not the same thing as buying stock in a public company, for example, but the structure is similar. So you buy stock, you buy this preferred stock, you invest in the co-op, you give us the capital we need to open the store, and in return, we offer a dividend when the store is profitable and has the ability to do so. So those are the two kinds of owner investments, and this is a really high overview. I have probably spent just a few minutes on that, maybe 5 minutes or so, and these are complicated, detailed contracts that we make available to our owners, so it is complicated. So I'm going to take a pause here and let you all ask some questions if you have them.
Not quite sure what the difference is between, okay, so it's considered equity rather than debt.
Right, for shares versus loans, right. Loans have a specific term, Susan. So a loan is usually for a specific stated period of time. Dividends don't have a specific term. Those are bought back at the discretion of the co-op if and when they choose to do so, or when they're profitable. So those are some other differences between the two.
Any difference in the tax consequences of the money that's invested?
Great question. Dividends, if the co-op paid dividends, they would issue a 1099. Same with interest on your loan, they would issue a 1099. So there could be implications tax-wise on either a loan or preferred
So
shares.
that's really no different then. Okay.
No.
Okay.
I think the form is different. Like the loan is I think it's a 1099 INT and the dividend is a 1099-D or something
Yeah.
like that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Got it. Right. Thank you.
Yep. Other questions?
Hey, Katie,
Okay.
I've got a question.
Yeah.
And this is something, by the way, that we've talked to Katie about, and we're thinking about preferred shares for our Westchester co-op and loans, and wondering for any folks here on this call who've had experience doing that, do you find that there's a kind of an education hurdle with your members around loans and shares? And I guess one of our questions internally is like, well, we want to make this available if that's appealing, but we don't want to add any speed bumps to the process of someone participating.
Rusty, would you like to chime in there?
I I guess there is an education process. I mean, in Illinois, the biggest problem we had was that Illinois got a limit on the number of shares you can own. So it's a 10 share limit. And we had quite a few people that had already purchased 10 shares. We have levels, and we had a cornucopia level that was 10 shares. So for those people that wanted to buy in to preferred shares, we had to actually have them sell back their common shares. And then we had to keep track of that sell back amount and then purchase the preferred shares and then offset the cost of the preferred shares. So it was an education for them, and it was sometimes difficult for them to do the math. But other than that, it wasn't too difficult. Sometimes when we tried to explain to them the loan, when you tell people that they can pick their own loan interest rate, they were also a little surprised. We tried to tell them that, you're an owner here, and if you pick a lower interest rate, it really helps out the co-op because it just shows that you believe in what we're doing a little bit more than somebody else might. So we did have a few people that chose that 0.1% interest rate, which really helped. So yeah, it's an educational issue sometimes.
And Susan,
Thanks,
I
Rusty.
know you weren't necessarily involved in the co-op side of investing at Green Top, but you
Yeah.
were involved from a personal perspective as an owner. So
Right.
did you find the educational component, the fact that you had to understand what loans were, to be something that you had to overcome, or that was confusing or challenging?
I don't think so. I mean, I thought it was pretty straightforward that this, the store had to succeed before we got anything back. And it sounded good. If everything had gone really well, it would have been a really great investment, but it still was a really great investment. It's just not necessarily financially.
Right. And Green Top, as if many of you aren't aware of, they are open and doing okay as we are standing now, but they're not thriving as we had hoped they would be thriving. And so their owner loans have not yet been repaid. Some of them have come due and have not yet been repaid. So that's a piece of the puzzle, a piece of the process that we all have to think about and prepare for in terms of the co-op's ability to succeed. We all hope and wish and pray, if you do that kind of thing, that that the store will be successful. But in some cases, pandemics and things happen and the world changes. But regardless, it's important to think through that process and what that would look like for the co-op. And the education piece, Tim, is, I think, to give you my insight on that question, what we're doing requires education. Lending money to the co-op or purchasing preferred shares is a different kind of investment than 99.9% of us are used to. And
Mhm.
so it does require some education. And so there is, I think it's valuable to put some thought into what makes sense for your co-op in terms of how you educate your owners. But it's important to realize that regardless of what we choose, we're gonna have that education piece.
I do have a question about, all right, would the preferred shares make any difference to people's accessing the money? Maybe this is a really stupid question, but you know, cash flow is kind of a biggie. And is it, again, I'm not a financial person at all. Not afraid of numbers, just don't know well, you know, the world. If there's any difference in your access to that money.
Are you talking about the co-op's access to the money or the investor's access?
No, the
The
co-op.
co-ops? Nope, no difference.
No.
Good question.
Okay.
Yeah, no dumb questions, folks. This is all new to us. We're all learning about this. You know, and finances aren't something that some of us are experts at. So no dumb questions.
I could tell you our preferred share money was spent about 2 months ago, Susan. So,
What did you spend it on, Rusty?
well, I mean, it's just been in the pot, so. you know,
Gotcha.
Yeah.
It's there and being utilized. Yeah.
Okay.
being utilized, right?
Yep. Ron, did you have a question?
No,
Okay. Okay. I'm gonna
not yet anyhow.
okay, good. I thought I heard a noise from your corner of the screen. It looks like Debbie, you do have a question.
It's not a question, but I'm just gonna say for us, we have sold like almost $80,000 worth in preferred shares, and it's been held in escrow because we don't have a building yet. But once we get a building, we'll have to spend it.
Yes. Yes.
And we're working on it. We're close, so that's a good thing.
Awesome. Good for you. Good for you. That's great. Yes, Sheila.
Debbie, you just brought up something interesting. So when you sell preferred shares, that money has to be held, like, or is earmarked for a particular part of the project. It's not just random, let's pay some bills because they're due now, or does that all depend on how you structure it all? I'm guessing I just answered my own question.
Well, for ours, we've done fiduciary responsibility for all the member owner money. We've had grants
Got
to
it.
pay for all the studies so far and a little bit of operating cash. We don't sell common shares except for the 1 share each person gets for their membership.
Sure.
But
Okay,
Sheila,
thank you.
yes, you did answer your own question there.
Okay,
Indeed.
thank you.
It does depend on how you legally structure the offering. And one thing that we haven't talked about yet, which is another layer of the onion when we're talking about preferred shares and owner investments, is where these funds are held and in what kind of account they are held. During the startup process, typically we'll see a co-op hold their investments in escrow, which is basically a fancy word for a protected account that can only release the funds when certain contingencies are met. And the board either secures a specific escrow account, which can be, I have found to be hard. And not every community has a bank or an organization, maybe it's a title company or someone who is willing to create an escrow account for them. But there are other ways to do so. You can set up a bank account that requires numerous board signatures and a resolution of the board to release the funds. There are ways to make it work, but that's basically what we're talking about here when we're talking about an escrow account. And so you want to think about when you're drafting your offering to sell your preferred shares or your loans, when you need those funds and under what conditions you're going to utilize those funds. And you want to work that language into your offering.
Yeah, good.
Okay, let's go back to our conversation here. We've talked about owner equity and we've talked about owner investments. Donations are the next piece of the puzzle or piece of that pie. And when I first started raising capital for grocery stores back in probably 2015 or 16 with Green Top, donations weren't a piece of the puzzle that was even notable. We might have gotten a few $100s or maybe a few $1,000s for that bucket. But as the campaign progressed, we noticed more and more individuals who were interested in donating. An investment perhaps didn't make the most sense for them, and they weren't interested in a return on the funds, but they would give us money, they would donate to us. And so we developed a partnership with the local community foundation to accept donations on our behalf with a tax benefit available to the owner. Of course, members, any community members and owners of the community and members of the co-op can give the co-op money. Of course, that's a donation to the co-op is possible without a fiscal sponsor, but there's no tax benefit to the donor at that point. But if you do have a relationship with a fiscal sponsor, you can accept donations on behalf of the co-op, and the owner or the donor would have those benefits. We're now seeing the donation piece of the puzzle, and we have since 2015 increased. More and more co-ops are relying on donations as a significant piece of their capital stack. And we'll look at that, what that looks like in a couple of minutes when we look at that slide. Any questions about donations? Pretty straightforward. I mean, we're all pretty comfortable, I think, with making donations and organizations that utilize donations. Yes, Susan.
Owner equity was 10%. How about owner investment?
We're gonna look at a comparison of that, Susan. So I'll wait to answer that. So we're looking at that slide.
Okay.
But it used to be about 50% of the pie, and we're seeing that has decreased slightly. Other questions?
Katie?
Yeah.
Katie, Ron, this is Ron. One
Yeah.
thing I've discovered that to get the tax deductible donation, the individual has to donate an amount, and I think it's around 29,000.
Yes, it's significant. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So if somebody wants to write a check for $1,000 and get a tax deductible, their total donation stack on the IRS has to go to, to get it up to 29, there has to be a church. There has to be charitable organizations that you're writing checks to. So it's difficult. How many people donate 29,000 to anybody?
Right. Yeah. The tax laws are not, they have changed, and they aren't benefiting the donor as much as they used to. Yes.
Yeah. They're not friendly.
No, that's very true. Very true. Good point.
But it is the IRS.
Kind of love the IRS, don't we?
If it's helpful for folks, kind of playing off of what Ron just shared, my work is in financial planning. Essentially, Ron's talking about the standard deduction that most people take, and it is approximately 14,000 for an individual, 28, 29 for a couple. And essentially, if you've got someone who is itemizing those tax deductible, that can also be state local taxes, and there's other things that can go into that figure. But Ron's absolutely right, and most folks don't understand when you say, hey, it's a tax deductible donation, it's maybe $300 and $350, and then they cut it off. Otherwise, you really have to be above those high thresholds with your deductions to then have tax qualification.
Yes, thank you, Tim. From the words of the financial planner, or from the mouth of the financial planner.
Right.
Okay, so grants are the next piece of the puzzle. When I started doing this fundraising work 10 years or so ago, grants were few and far between, and we were discouraged from pursuing grants in the industry. Folks who had been working in the co-op world knew that there were very few grants who were interested in investing in co-ops, and not a lot of funds available. That has changed significantly. The pandemic really highlighted the need to address our food system and the fact that it is broken and continues to be broken despite the fact that the world continues on. But the USDA has recognized that there is value in supporting co-ops, and we're seeing a significant increase in the amount of grants available to co-ops. In fact, the Healthy Food Finance Initiative just recently announced, gosh, billions, I don't know, a lot of money. I don't, the dollar figure was staggering, and at least 14 co-ops by my count, including one of them, at least one that's on our call here, Butte Food Co-op, received some of that funding. So it is something that we're seeing a lot more attention paid to, a lot more co-ops have success with. So that's changing as well. And then we have the debt piece of the puzzle. That's basically the co-op taking out loans to cover the difference, to finish the store. And that's usually where debt comes in, at that last piece of the puzzle. Your banks and your lenders, outside of your owner lenders, are going to want to see a lot of funding in place before they can come through, or before they will come through with loan funds. Long Beach Co-op. Oh, you were not awarded. Is that what you're saying, Sheila? You did not get the HFFI funding?
Yeah, we didn't. I found out when I went to SOLA's annual meeting, I found out that they missed it by 4 points. I guess there was some kind of scoring thing where you had to get a 70 or better. And I guess they got a 66 or a 67.
Mhm.
So they missed it by whatever. And then my thanks but no thanks letter didn't even have the paragraph about getting a score. So I reached out and I said, what did we do wrong? What could we have done better? How can I do better next time? Just trying to get some education on, because I'm sure it's going to come around again, and I know we'll try again. But it was pretty sad. We were sad. We put a lot of work into it.
Yeah, right. That was a
Wow.
big undertaking for many co-ops, I know. But hopefully next time you'll get some
Yeah.
good feedback and it'll work out.
Wow, 148,000. Woohoo.
Is that
Wow,
Carrot? Oh yeah, Purple Carrot. I didn't know
Wow.
Purple Carrot was on the line too. Yes, they got funding too. Yes.
Yeah.
great. Wow.
And our funding was this was the planning grant that we
Yeah,
that Chrissy
that's what we
submitted
were-
in June.
And I guess there's one called FARE, FARE, coming
Yes.
up next
Mhm.
Yep.
Yes.
in any minute or something. Yeah.
Yep. That is the next one, I believe. Yeah. Yeah.
Mhm.
So we are seeing that be a significantly bigger piece of the puzzle than we have in the past. But back to debt. So basically these are your bank loans. These are loans that you're going to take out either with local banks or with cooperative lenders. Those seem to be the two types of banks that are willing to invest in cooperators. And well, basically what I'll say about bank loans is that they're more expensive. They are less flexible. And I think Susan can probably attest to the fact that that's true. Green Top is doing much better than they had done in the past, but the bank loans continue to be probably our biggest hurdle at that co-op. And so it's something that we really have to, I think, consider very seriously when we're building our capital stack. How much debt are we willing to take on, and how much debt can we realistically afford? So let's look at,
Hey, Katie, can I
Yeah.
ask a quick question about the debt?
Yep.
One of the things that we're looking into is small business loans. And in the state of Pennsylvania, there's some backing from the state with very favorable interest rates. Just
Yes.
curious if that's a part of anyone's experience.
I believe Rusty could probably talk to that. Rusty, did you guys get an SBA guarantee?
No, we did not. We actually went to the USDA.
Oh, USDA, that's right. Yeah.
Yeah, and that was quite the fiasco, what we had to jump through and the hoops we had to jump through. But We finally got it, so. But yeah, we did the federal government USDA guarantee, loan guarantee.
And I believe Fredericksburg Food Co-op has also utilized the USDA loan guarantee. So has anyone else had experience with the SBA?
The food shed, I'm not exactly sure how it worked, but they got a USDA loan and then a local bank. The USDA guaranteed the local bank
Right,
that gave a loan.
right. Yeah, that's exactly how it worked, but it took us forever to get the USDA guarantee behind it. That's what held us up for quite a while. It took us over a year to get the USDA to guarantee that loan.
And that's a great point, Rusty. And we're seeing that that trend persist across, whether it's the USDA loan program or grant program, access to the funding, final decisions do take quite some time and a significant amount of red tape and paperwork. The co-ops that I know of that have had success in dealing with those larger grants and USDA programs have a hired staff person that manages that. Or at least a dedicated board person that can put some significant time into that, because it is time consuming. It is time consuming and cumbersome.
It also made a big impact on our preferred share documents too, because they were all held in escrow and we had to have an end date on the sell date on them. And we had to keep extending that date because the USDA kept pushing us back farther and farther. So I think we had to extend that date 4 times, if I'm not mistaken, because they were extending their dates so long. So
Yeah, right. So, I mean, there's so many ripples that those delays have. That's a great point. That is a great point. Okay, let's look at a capital stack then from, this is what a traditional capital stack looked like about 10 years ago. So we saw equity, and Susan, to answer your question more specifically, equity being about 10%, owner investments being 40%. So 50% of the pie was comprised of the ownership, the owner's responsibility. Bank debt was at about 30%, very few grants, if any, and then a small amount of donations, about 15% of donations. But today, this is a 2024 capital stack. And now this takes into consideration also, I will note that first, the landscape has changed in terms of what startup co-ops look like since 2015. So in 2015, just to be 100% honest and blunt here, it was a whole bunch of middle-class white people who wanted a nice grocery store and access to healthy food. Now we're seeing folks of color, communities of color, disinvested areas of community of the country that are utilizing the cooperative model to get access to food. So not just necessarily, nice, beautiful grocery stores that sell local food, but access to food. And so that has significantly shifted some of this funding as well, because more grant funding is available in these disinvested areas. So to compare the 2015 stack with this stack, with the 2024 stack, we're seeing equity being a little bit higher. So that's not unreasonable. Owner investments, though, are only at about 11%. If you look at all of the co-ops who are organizing right now and what their capital stacks look like. So those loans and shares are making up a much smaller piece of the puzzle. Grants and donations taking up over half of those funds. So we're really seeing co-ops rely more heavily on funding that's available through either public funding. And when I'm talking about public funding, I'm talking about municipalities. We have some co-ops where the county perhaps or the city has land, they own land and have given it to the co-op or leased it on a 99-year lease to the co-op. And so there's lots of ways government or public entities are supporting co-ops. And so you'll see that piece of the funding has been added here too, that about 8% of what we're seeing a capital stack look like is some sort of municipal or government support outside of grants and donations. And then that bank debt piece is only about 12%. And in some cases, I'm working with co-ops who cannot afford any bank debt. Their pro forma simply won't work if they have to pay interest on bank debt. They just can't make it work. And so they have to find a way to fund their stores with the rest of these buckets, taking that bank debt out of the puzzle.
Katie, you mentioned the kind of the change in proportions, especially around the grant and public funding. And it looks like the shareholder or member owner investment is a much smaller. So you mentioned much more access to grants. Are you noticing any difficulties with getting people involved with investing?
Oh, that's a great question. I wouldn't say that I would notice any issues. I think what we're seeing is a reallocation of resources within co-ops, whereas 10 years ago we might not have anybody on the volunteer team who was working on grants. If a grant happened upon us and we thought it was good, someone would do it, you know. But now what we're seeing in cooperative organizing is that they have a committee or a series of people, 3 or 4 people who are researching grants, putting a lot more time and energy. I did my last Coffee with Katie was a grant presentation on a professional nonprofit consultant who helps co-ops and nonprofits build basically a grant library and a grant I don't know, she had a better word for it, but like basically a booklet. You write the answers to your grants and you have them pre-written so that when the grant opportunity comes available, you've got great language that you can tailor to that specific opportunity. So I wouldn't say that investing is suffering. I'd say co-ops are reallocating resources to where funds are. Good question though. Good question. Any other questions?
Katie, I have one addition
Yeah.
to the capital stack. We're going to try naming rights.
Yeah.
Oshkosh had a really, I don't know what the percentage of their stack was, but it was pretty good.
Yeah, they did. And that would fall probably in that donations and grants category, or depending on how those funds are, I guess you could you could issue a loan in exchange for naming rights, depending on how you structure that. But absolutely, that's a creative way. Prairie Food Co-op had some success with naming rights as well, as did Oshkosh. Some co-ops find that to be a good option for them. Some co-ops do not. And I'll tell you that the cooperative mentality is, one member, one vote, we're all equal, we're all in this together. And naming rights calls out an entity, an organization, an individual as different from the rest of us. And so depending on the co-op's values, depending on their mindset around that, some do decide to do it and some decide that it's not the right fit for their co-op. Rusty, did you guys do naming rights at Food Chat? I don't think you did you?
No,
Oh, you turned your mute on.
I turned it on and I turned it off.
Right.
No, we did not, just for that reason. We had discussed it and said, our values say that one vote per person, per owner just didn't make sense to us. So we didn't want anybody standing above anybody else. So we decided not to.
Gotcha. Yeah, Sheila.
And I heard, I can't remember who or which co-op it was, but they did do the naming rights, but they gave it a limit. So it's not like, Sheila's Bake Shop can, sponsor the bakery indefinitely. It's like, okay, your sponsorship, your naming rights is going to last 12 months, 18 months. And then it was a limit. So
Yep.
there was it was flexibility.
Yes, absolutely. I have seen that implemented. And I think Oshkosh had a time limit on theirs. But yeah, that's a good point. Good point. Okay, so the next thing I just want to talk about briefly is why we're seeing these changes. You know, why these things are happening. The pandemic was a huge impact. You know, as we talked about earlier, our supply chain was broken drastically. We've seen inflation through the roof. Project costs are significantly higher than we have ever seen them before. I think Rusty, you can probably speak to that. Your project costs jumped pretty significantly during the pandemic and necessitated another round of fundraising. And so that the overall project cost is really impacting the pro forma. And all of what we're talking about here in relation to the capital stack translates to your pro forma. And the pro forma is just a fancy word for your financials and your projections for the next 10 years. And if you can't make your projections work with the capital stack, with your projected funding, you can't open. And we can't ethically ask our investors to invest, our owners to invest if the numbers don't work. And so these increased costs are really dramatically impacting what that capital stack looks like and it impacts what we can afford. Can we afford to pay bank loans? Can we afford to pay owner loans? Can we afford to pay dividends? And we have to decide, we have to make those decisions. As I talked about a little bit before, the demographics of co-ops have changed dramatically. We're seeing a lot of co-ops opening in disinvested areas of the country, and that's changing the availability of funds and the investment opportunities for owners. You know, if you're trying to bring a grocery store to a low income community, likely those folks aren't going to be coming forward to invest in loans and shares in your store. So you're going to have to find another way to fund that store. The expansion of grants we've talked about has expanded exponentially, and we're focusing more on donations. I think we've realized that there are folks that are interested in supporting access to healthy food, whether that's through grants or through donations, and we're seeing that be more and more successful. And what it means in the end is that there really is less bank debt available. Banks are recognizing that co-ops aren't thriving at the pace we'd like them to be thriving. Probably 10 years ago, growth was astronomical in the organic and natural food sector, 20% probably growth. And now it's, you know, we're seeing average 2 or 3% growth. So the financials aren't supporting bank loans. And so we're seeing a smaller amount of bank loans available if a co-op is qualified. Some banks aren't even considering the lending to co-ops, let alone reducing the amount of money available to them. And bank loans are more expensive. You know, interest rates and bank loans, especially for a business loan, are pretty expensive and prohibitive in many cases for a co-op's capital stack. And as I talked about before, if the pro forma won't allow it, if we can't afford that debt, it doesn't do us any good to take it on because we won't be able to stay in business. And so we've got to find unique ways to raise money and inexpensive ways to raise money. And co-ops are doing lots of creative things. I'm going to stop sharing my screen now because it's not necessarily the topic of our conversation, but one thing I will recommend and stress to you all in terms of being creative about your fundraising and thinking outside the box is pursuing relationships with your elected officials. You know, having a relationship with your city council, with your mayor, with your state legislator, with your senator, at the national level and the local level. Prairie Food Co-op in Lombard, Illinois is an excellent example of a strong relationship with an Illinois legislator who was able to get them, I think, $800,000 of funding. And so it really is important to have those conversations and to develop those relationships. That's also going to be a topic of conversation in an upcoming conversation with Katie. We'll talk about how you build those relationships and the best way to go about doing that. But the focus of our conversation today here really is the capital stack. So I'll stop talking for a minute and let you all ask some questions or talk to each other about what you're seeing here and what you're thinking.
Okay, just a question. When you're thinking about debt, loan from a bank, are you distinguishing any difference between a kind of a lump sum, say like construction loan versus something like a line of credit to get you through cash flow homes?
Not necessarily, no. You'll put them in one bucket, so to speak, in your pro forma. And so it's just the amount of money that you're gonna have to pay for, regardless of what the use is or when you need it. And it has less it's less flexible, more restrictive terms than your owner loans.
I guess I have a question, Katie, and I don't know if you can answer this or not, but is there a way to take advantage of people who want to forgive a loan before the loan comes due?
Absolutely.
How,
There is.
how is that done? Because I think I know of people who want to take advantage, and when I run that past our GM, he seems to think that it's not going to make a difference until the loans are mature and we have to pay them back. And at that point, the debt gets transferred to equity or whatever because it gets off the books.
That's a good question, Rusty. It is possible. I know of lenders who have forgiven their loans to the co-op, but I haven't been involved in that process, nor the accounting. But I believe, I'm just thinking out loud here. It'd be some kind of written documentation that the loan is forgiven from the owner from the investor to the co-op, and then an accounting entry that would move I believe immediately it could be moved. It becomes equity at that point.
Yeah, that's what I would think. And I would think your debt to equity ratio would change and be
Yes.
that. So
Yes.
Jenny, can you address that? Jenny? Okay.
I'm sorry,
All right.
I was a little distracted.
Okay, we have forgiven a couple loans and we have a process, right?
Yes, there's some paperwork that generally if owners have reached out to us, I think Harlan has that, and so he'll reach out then and say, here are the forms that we need you to fill out and return to us. And yeah.
And
I'll do
I
that.
think, I can't remember again what the tax consequences of that forgiveness, maybe nothing.
I don't think there would be tax consequences for that because there's no benefit to the investor.
oh,
Right, you would probably cease to receive that 1099 each
Right.
year.
Right,
You wouldn't
So-
forfeit anything that you had earned probably to
Right.
date, but I'm not sure how.
but you never got that money.
Right, you still wouldn't get that probably until we start to pay back loans, and instead of paying back that loan, we'd probably just be paying the accrued interest that had accrued until the loan was forgiven. I don't know. I haven't seen that paperwork. Maybe it forgives that accrued interest as well.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But I don't know if that requires you to go back and amend previous returns,
Yeah, oh
you know,
boy,
that you've been
No.
putting your 1099 and your taxes each year.
right,
I'm not enough of a tax expert to know. Maybe you would just be out that interest or whatever, and it would be fairly inconsequential, maybe.
Mhm.
Yeah, I think we definitely need a tax person to give us financial or final answer on this, but I believe, whatever's been issued up until the point they forgive their loan remains. So, if you got a 1099 last year and you forgive your loan this year, you just don't get a 1099 this year. And the loan equity changes columns at the co-op. But Rusty, I think we can get you a copy of that paperwork. Jenny, do you
Katie?
think we could get that?
Can I hop in here?
Yeah.
We asked our accountant on this, and the caution our accountant gave us is that forgiven loans become income in the year they're forgiven to the co-op. So if there is $10,000 of forgiven loans, that becomes $10,000 of taxable income to the
Oh.
co-op. And then for the individual, it would be, they could write it off as
It's a
a
loss.
loss.
Right.
But, and for the individual, it may or may not have tax advantage. But the issue our accountant had with it was that it becomes taxable
Income.
in the year it is forgiven.
Right, which I don't think would be an issue for an open co-op.
Correct. Yeah. For an open co-op, it wouldn't be as big of a deal as it was for someone
For a
who's still
startup.
starting up.
Okay, maybe I'll
Yeah.
run it past our accountant first and see.
Okay, and we
The
could probably
co-op
get you a
agreement.
copy of that paperwork, Rusty.
Okay,
You need it.
thanks.
Yep. Other questions or thoughts? This is a big topic. This is, we could spend days on each of the pieces of this puzzle or the pieces of this pie chart. So this is a high level overview for sure. But I encourage you to think through the ramifications of your capital stack, primarily that debt piece is where we're seeing co-ops struggle in repaying those bank loans. Owner loans tend to be more flexible, of course, as we've talked about, but it's important to think about that and be conservative in your projections and what you can afford to pay back, so that if and when you are more successful than you thought, you're in a good position.
Katie, if we've got a second here on
Yeah.
the time, could you talk a little bit about how, when we're planning for a co-op startup, how we think about not just the different components of the capital stack, but the proportions? And
Yeah.
so then that allows us then to set targets, say on a donation drive or what have you.
Yeah, that's a great question. And I think utilizing that pie chart is a good starting point to look at what other co-ops are doing in terms of their capital stack, what is working in the co-op industry, and then begin to plug those numbers reflective to your co-op into your pro forma. So put in what does it look like in the pro forma if you have 54% from grants and donations as we showed on the chart? What does it look like if 11% of your investment capital comes from owners? And start to play with that. And what does that do to your projections in 10 years and 5 years? And can you afford to make those payments? And then when you begin to play with those scenarios, you can begin to fine tune what makes sense for you. Okay, we don't need 54% in grants. We can make do with 30% of grants, and we're going to have more. We have more availability to owner loans than another co-op might have. So our piece of that pie might be bigger. So it's a matter of testing the waters by utilizing your pro forma, basically, and starting with industry standards, I think, is a good place to start. And that's a big undertaking. So hopefully someone on your team, on your co-op team, is owning and responsible for your pro forma. And that means they're well versed in it. They're playing with these scenarios. They can help you walk through, okay, what does it look like if our owner loans are X% instead of Y%? And how does that impact our bottom line in subsequent years? And it's a plug for it's a plug for having good projections, honestly. The investment in your pro forma is often a significant investment when you're a startup, and sometimes we avoid that, or we're hesitant to invest in that, but it gives us some foundation to stand on when we're having conversations with our owners about investing in the co-op, that we have these projections and we've utilized this industry expertise to create these projections. And we feel comfortable in asking for your investment because we've made those investments in that expertise. When I'm helping co-ops raise money and we're coaching callers who are reaching out to owners, I always tell them to be comfortable with quiet, because that's when people start talking and that's when you can listen. And so I'm going to be quiet. And if there are more questions, I'm happy to answer them. It doesn't have to be on this topic either. There are other things you want to talk about, we can talk about that. Okay, well, I gave you an opportunity, folks, and you didn't chime in, so we're gonna end at 12:58. But it's been a pleasure to talk with you all. So good to see some of you I haven't seen for some time. I appreciate you joining us, and I'm happy to answer any other questions via email. So send me a note, and I'll see you again in 2025.
Awesome.
All right. Take care.
Thank you.
Happy Thanksgiving.
Oh, yes. Happy Thanksgiving. Yes, yes.
Bye.